here we are. Hold on. There we go. So, wow. Wow. I am sure because the report dropped roughly about 2 hours ago at this point. I'm presuming some of you have already seen the highlights. I've tried to avoid, shall we say, seeing some of the highlights, but we've already seen. I've already seen some of, shall we say, the spoilers. So, oh, yeah, this, as a lot of people are saying, and I to be honest, I will say this now. I am very careful about proclaiming the end of Boris Johnson's political career. I am very careful about proclaiming it because we have seen people proclaim Johnson's career is over. That's it. It's over. Finally, Johnson is gone, only for him to carry on later. Now, is this finally it? Is this report a very damning report, as we are about to go into? Is this finally it? Is this what finally ends Boris Johnson? To be honest, it's got a good swing. It's got a very good swing and a very good chance at doing so. As I'm sure, again, if you've, shall we say, seen some of the spoilers out there, you know some of the stuff that is going to be brought up in the report. But as always, when we do these types of things, we're going to go through the whole thing from start to finish, just to see what's going on, and of course, what is being said in this regard. It is an absolutely boiling day outside, so I might have to have a couple of breaks to go and shall we say refresh my my drink. Oh, but we will see. And yeah, Robert, you are right. You are right. That is still the question. As of yet, in fact, tell you what, let me get up a timeline that's watching this. Let's get up a live thing. So so yeah, I've got a couple of interesting things already happening at the moment. The Lib Dems have called for Johnson to lose his ex-PM allowance. I think that will be good. We'll probably go over this at the end, but Johnson has apparently list the 6 things why he thinks the of why this report is awful and terrible. We'll probably go over that at the end. Like I say, it'll probably be very quick. Labour is calling for Johnson to repay the £245,000 of taxpayers' money that's spent, of course, on legal funding during the inquiry. Penny Mordaunt has said that MPs are going to get a free vote on approving the Privilege Committee report on Monday. And of course, just 19 minutes ago, Mordaunt has come out and criticised Johnson supporters for threatening Tory MPs with deselection if they back committee's report. So we are seeing skirmishes at the moment in the offing over this. But I'll tell you now, they feel confident. Johnson supporters do feel a bit confident because, as I've said just a couple of weeks ago, Johnson, and certainly maybe most of the parliamentary Conservative Party wants to get rid of Johnson, but the non-parliamentary party, Johnson still has a lot of support. I've got to stress that he has a lot of support. Just as, again, Robert, from Indiana, just as many Americans, many of the American viewers that are joining us today, Colin Thompson, you're from New York. All of you will attest to the fact that all the stuff that Trump has done, even the new indictments where he is, taken that national security information, Trump still has supporters in the Republican Party, in the, shall we say, the non, well, I don't know what you would call it, because I don't know in America if you split sort of the party in two like we do over here, because we've got the parliamentary party, which refers to pretty much all the people in parliament, so all the MPs, and then you would refer to the non-parliamentary party, which is basically people who are members of the Conservative Party. So I suppose you would call them members of the Republican Party, I suppose. They all still, a big chunk still support Trump. And that's why a lot of people think, even in these primaries, he's got a good shot for winning. Now, of course, we'll see what happens to Trump. But just like Trump, Johnson has a lot of support. Johnson has a lot of support. But interestingly enough, if those deselections go ahead, that is going to cause full-scale war. That is a full-scale civil war. And currently, we're seeing a couple of skirmishes going on and around this. And it is mostly Johnson's allies that are sort of promoting that idea that if you back this report, if you vote for this report, we're coming after you. We're coming after you in a deselection process. And the Tories being involved in something like that in a potential run-up to a general election, well, we'll see. We'll see what happens. But this is going to cause full-scale war. Two pensions, yeah. That shirt. Does it mean the Schrödinger cat? I'm alive yet alive. Yeah. Like I say, here's my little shirt. There you go. So, well, without further ado, without, again, giving too much more fanfare, like I say, please do remember to hit the like and share button. Like I say, let's get more people in here. Let's have some fun in this afternoon, because it's going to be a fun afternoon. I can guarantee you that. So let me get to my good view so that you can all see the report. But here it is. This is it. It dropped roughly around 10 o'clock-ish. Oh, look who we've got. It is...
Hello.
We've got a Graham.
Hello, a wild Graham has appeared. So I've still got James O'Brien speaking in my ear, but he's gone now, so that's all right. Hi, Ollie, how you doing, mate?
I'm all right. He is absolutely having a field day on LBC. He is loving it. He is loving it.
I think everyone's loving it. It's all so good. I mean, 90 days. 90 days.
I know. I don't think that's ever happened before.
It's unprecedented.
I know. I do not think there is anyone else that has ever happened to. And 90 days.
Yes.
If he had stayed, he would be donezo. But then again, does the recall petition happen? Because again, it's up to his constituents.
Yeah.
And even that, we're like,
well, this is him out the Tory party forever. But I'm hoping he's going to take some people down with him, because anyone who's saying that this is a contempt of court, a kangaroo court, like Nadine Dorries, who's leaving anyway, apparently, at some point. But also, you've got like Brendan Lewis and all those crazies, and Rees Mogg. He said it. Anyone who said kangaroo court about this privileges committee, they should face sanctions. They should have the whip taken from them.
Well, at the moment, they're threatening deselections. So all those Johnson allies, they're all threatening deselections against anyone who backs this report. And that's full-blown civil war. If they start doing that, that's full-blown civil war.
Please give me all the civil war. I love it. I love it.
Oh, it's going to be Beautiful. Penny Mordaunt has already come out and admonished them for doing that. Say, please don't do that. But I say, please do that.
Do it. I want as many Tories as possible to call it a kangaroo court.
Or
lose
have
the
you
whip.
seen Johnson's released his 6 points why he doesn't believe the committee?
Yeah, I'm here with Ben Chambers. Actually, he was just telling me about Johnson's absolute madness of his reply that he's given.
Oh yeah.
No, yeah, he still maintains his innocence.
Yeah.
So what have you got? Have you got the 6 things there?
Yeah, somewhere. Let me just see if I can get them.
Who's it? I'm on to Ollie, Bowler Hatman.
Hi Ollie.
Oh,
hello. How you doing?
All right. How are you?
Oh, are you live streaming right now?
Yeah,
I'm live now. Yeah,
it's a private conversation.
No, we're live streaming. I think
we're just taking in the full extent of this. Actually, can I ask you a quick question because you might know this? I've been asking, I can't find a definitive answer. On the 7-man woman committee with Harriet Harman as chair, did she have a vote in the totality of sanctions?
No, she doesn't get a vote.
Well, someone's told me that she would have a vote if it was 3-3. Then she'd have a casting vote. But I'm trying to find out, and I can't find out whether or not the committee unanimously went for those sanctions or she had a casting vote.
From what I've heard so far, I don't think she does, because I think you're right. I think she only gets it in the event of a tie. Don't quote me on that.
So all that stuff about Harriet Harman.
The reason I'm asking is because Boris Johnson, again, in his statement this morning, he has gone for her specifically. He calls it her committee, her being biased against him. She should have recused herself like Chris Bryant. What I can't work out is, if that's the case, does he not know that she didn't have a vote at all? And therefore, without her vote on the committee, it's even more biased in favour of the Conservatives. Because it was already 4-3, so it's effectively 4-2. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I don't think he knows. I really don't think he knows.
Is what you're saying correct? She doesn't have a vote unless there's a tie.
She doesn't have a vote.
So, was there a tie or was it unanimous?
No, it's a unanimous vote. From what we know,
that's what yeah.
Yeah, from what I've been hearing, it's been a unanimous vote, and I think it was the SNP, but he wanted an even tougher sanction on Johnson. I think that's why
expulsion from Parliament. Didn't he
wanted as Beth Rigby reported, he wanted explosion
from Parliament.
Yeah,
which I think a lot of people have felt was maybe a bit harsh, but I mean, in this eventuality, yeah. But no, that's interesting. So as far as you know, she didn't have a vote. Would have had the casting vote, but it was unanimous. Yeah. But okay, that's brilliant. Thank you.
Cool. See you. Like I say, feel free to join. If you fancy joining us, feel free.
I am exploding your kindness. I'm exploding Ben's kindness. He's making me a cuppa. Right. I don't know if we've got time to go through the whole report. It's like 100 and odd pages, isn't it?
I've got the
100.
I've got the well, I was going to say it's the more slimmed down one. Yeah, it's about 108 pages, but most of it is, as you can see here in the contents.
You're gonna be going through this all afternoon.
Yeah, it could be. I'm not gonna. I might be doing some, shall we say, selective reading. So yeah, so I think we'll probably go over the summary. We'll probably go over like the importance of the inquiry. That'll be good to go over. Maybe some of the bits of the introductions. We're not going to go over this because we already know about that. That's just basically talking about the gatherings. I don't think there's anything new in that, as far as I'm aware.
See there, it says under 3, the purporters assurances from Jack Doyle and James Slack. I used to go to university with Jack Doyle, and we were in a comedy society together. And I got him for a comedy sketch called Conservatives Anonymous, admitting that he's a racist Tory voting bastard and apologising. I've just actually put it on the Labour social channel just for a laugh, just to like, Tory spin doctor apologises. And that was something we were just talking about that. How come when it was Alistair Campbell in the role of communications director, he was called a spin doctor always in the media? And yet, when they talk about them now, they're always director of communications. They never use the spin doctor.
I think that was the whole thing with or at least the right-wing paper's obsession with that they couldn't seem to get anything to stick on Tony Blair, that he was too good at playing the PR game. So you had to say, oh well, it's Blair's too good at playing the PR game, because Alistair Campbell is little spin doctor, spinning all the stuff. So I think that's why that's always stuck with Alistair Campbell, but not really continued into them.
Well, I've posted it on the Labour social channel. Partygate spin doctor Jack Doyle apologises for being a Tory. But he's an OBE now. He's been made an OBE.
Yeah.
He was Director of Communications for about 5 minutes during Partygate, and he gave assurances to Johnson that it wasn't a party. Sorry, parties.
I know. It's crazy. It really is. But the fact that I think what's really done it is the fact that they handed over more evidence after, and the fact that you had Johnson in the committee in front of them saying, yeah, there were no more parties.
Thanks. Yeah.
And then they found out all that more stuff. And it's like
all the stuff at Chequers.
Yeah.
But he said no parties at number 10. He said the rules were followed at number 10. But I love that when his dozy sister was on LBC and she's like, yeah, well, when I went to see him in Chequers, we followed all the rules. And I'm like, you shouldn't have gone to Chequers. You weren't allowed to. But yeah, there's a massively serious side to this, though. I mean, so many people lost so much during the lockdown period. They didn't get to see their parents, didn't get to see their kids. And people died, people not just from COVID, but people that they took their own lives and things because there was no one there for them. No one there to stop them, no one there to talk them round, let them know they're loved. And this gobshite, this Boris Johnson, sorry, I don't know if I'm allowed to swear on your channel, but it's just this bag of rancid custard who just had all these parties, like dozens of them. And he goes, and his excuse is, we worked really hard. And I'm like, piss off, mate. You worked hard. You're talking about the press office of your own, department. The press office is number 10. They're not working hard. They write up a press release each day.
Yeah, what, throwing up in number 10, wine stains on the wall,
having sex in cupboards, breaking
breaking
a swing, and then the people who were cleaning up were disparaged, and mocked for having to clean up the sick of these people, and these nearly everyone involved in Partygate has been given a gong by Boris Johnson.
I think, how long does this stick with them? How long does this keep with the Tories, even though Boris Johnson might be gone? I mean, I will say this now: Rishi Sunak is as weak as wet celery, probably even weaker than that. He has had a couple of chances by this point to get rid of Boris Johnson, to just permanently get rid of him, and yet, where's the announcement? Bear in mind, what are we? 3 hours now from this report dropping.
Yep.
Where has Rishi Sunak been to come out and just boot him out of the Conservative Party? Because if this is gonna hurt Rishi, because already I think there was a couple of days ago,
it's making him look weak.
Change for UK, something like that? Did focus groups up and down. One of the things that was breaking through that people were saying to them, they were saying about how weak Rishi Sunak is, how they think he's really weak, and the fact that little Rishi is becoming a thing.
The prime miniature.
Yeah.
Yeah, he needs to take control of it. So there was an uptick in his optics or his polling or whatever at the beginning of the week when he actually had the balls to say, that meeting where he said, look, the privileges committee, not the privileges committee, sorry, the honours that Boris Johnson had put out, it had gone to the House of Lords, HOLAC, and committee, and they had signed off on it, and tough luck. And when he said that, people actually applauded in the room that he was in, because they're like, oh, finally you're showing some backbone, well done. It's like patting a little kid on the head for doing well in the sack race or something. It was quite patronizing, but also Like, yeah, Tories want to see that, obviously, but then you've got that tear down the middle of the Tory party. You've got the same thing going on in the States with the Republicans and Trump, where you've got these people who absolutely love Boris Johnson, and they behave like the parents of serial killers who just can't get through their head that beautiful little Johnny chopped people up and put them in the freezer. You know what I mean?
I think if it did go, as it just said, I don't even think if they did a recall election, I don't think it would be triggered. I do not think they would get the votes to do it, because I still think there's enough people in Uxbridge that would vote for Boris Johnson again.
Well, I mean, he might get in again, but yeah, if for the recall, I think it's only like 6,000 signatures to actually make the by-election happen. But so
it might happen, but even if
they will definitely get the election. But would he win in Uxbridge again? I don't know. He did say he was going to lie in front of a bulldozer, but then he got elected again after doing that. He said, I'll lie in front of a bulldozer to stop this extra runway being built at Heathrow, and then he ran away to Afghanistan on the day of the vote, so he didn't have to vote on it.
It's we'll probably never know, because like I say, he's left. And still, as you said, who knows what's happening with Nadine Dorries?
Oh, she's completely bonkers.
I think she still hasn't quit properly or officially yet. So
what cracks me up about her thing about it's these posh boys who there's actually a book called Posh Boys, which is from what she said about at the time Gideon, what's his name, the old Chancellor, and Gordon Osborne, Gideon Osborne, to use his real name, and David Cameron. But the thing is, she was put into the position that she got into by the poshest boy of all, who's Boris Johnson.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's like, hang on, you can't say, oh, well, those posh boys stopped me from being a lady because I'm working class, honest. And I'm like, okay, right, well, who put you in the position that you could have become a lady in the first place? Oh, it was Boris Johnson. Guy who went to Eton, went to Oxford, never worked a day in his life, always failed upwards, always got sacked upwards somehow to the position of Prime Minister. When we had the worst Prime Minister at the worst possible time to have that Prime Minister, because you had a pandemic.
You say the worst Prime Minister. I mean, Liz trusts Boris Johnson.
Well, Liz trusts. Give her a due. She only stayed there for 6 weeks. So then she hid under a table, and she had Penny Mordaunt go out to Parliament and say she's not hiding under a table. It's a really random and very specific thing to say. Imagine if they had to go back and correct Hansard on that. Brilliant. I'd just like to correct the record that she was actually hiding.
Yeah, she was actually. The thing is, though, there's I don't know if you know the rumors. Both Mordaunt and Truss hate each other because they're from two different sections of the party, but they hate each other, and it was always said that because Mordaunt got put into the position that she was in at the time, it was sort of a downgrade to her. And obviously she ended up doing the big, sword carrying, which was seen by a lot of people as the big revenge of Penny Mordaunt against her. And we'll see.
Well, Phil's put up a video. I don't know if is this from today, that the snap election. Oh, that's from yesterday. Snap election is still on. Yeah, and apparently the Tories, as what I'm hearing on the through various WhatsApp groups, the Tories are finalising their candidate lists urgently.
That doesn't surprise me. I think if you are Rishi Sunak, to be honest, and elections the best thing to do, because you need to clean the house. You need to clean house, but I don't think he'll survive a loss of the party. That's for certain.
He's like, put me out my misery.
Yeah. But Cathal G, thank you very much for your super chat there. Yep. Have you seen Doris's tweet suggesting the Tories on the bribes?
We were just looking at that before I came on to you, actually. Absolutely bonkers. We also need to keep a close eye on the careers of the Conservative MPs who sat on that committee. This is Nadine Dorries. She tweeted it at 10:44 this morning. Do they suddenly find themselves on chicken runs into safe seats? Gongs. What promises were made? Were promises made? We need to know if they were. Justice has to be seen to be done at all levels of this process. Oh. Wow. Wowzers, trousers. That is Yeah. Oh, coming from her. Poor people.
So this is the 6 things why Boris Johnson thinks the committee is so flawed. So 1, apparently it's a kangaroo court. The committee has been a kangaroo court from the outset, and as Lord Patrick Panatrick, QC, has repeatedly pointed out, it has acted as judge and jury in its own case in a way that is contrary to all legal practice. So that's interesting there. The committee has contradicted the police's own findings. So, okay, setting itself above the law. Well, they don't really have powers of that type of power. So that I think he's just angry that he got caught in those other events. The committee has also been desperate to convict Boris Johnson that it is now said that all workplace events, thank yous and birthdays, and even motivational meetings were illegal. This is insane. This has no basis in the law, and the committee's view is contradicted by what the Metropolitan Police themselves found. The police said that Boris Johnson did not break the rules by attending the farewell events.
Yeah.
So number 3, the committee claims to know exactly what Boris Johnson saw at certain times and dates, despite there being no evidence for this. Well, there's photos in many of the cases, as if the committee were inside his head.
It's almost like they have a photograph of him looking at people at a party, holding up a glass of champagne. Almost.
So it has been driven to claim that it knows what Boris Johnson saw with his own eyes, and that he must have known that the events on December the 18th, 2020 were illegal because he must have seen it, as if he went up the stairs to his flat. This is just crazy. The committee has no idea what was going on or what Boris Johnson saw. In fact, he saw nothing. He saw nothing. And it struck him as being remotely untoward. The committee is just making things up. Oh, dear. So, number 4, if Boris Johnson must have known that this was illegal, others did too. The committee's logic is that dozens of other figures also knew. The committee's entire argument is that Boris Johnson must have known. Well, of course he must have known, because he was saying the rules constantly during that time. The events were illegal. This is rubbish. If Boris Johnson must have known, then what about Rishi Sunak, Simon Case? I like how they're bringing Rishi Sunak into this. Simon Case and Sue Gray, all were the other senior figures who were roving the corridors of Downing Street. What did they know? I like that sense. All the other senior figures who are roving the corridors of Downing Street.
The thing is that he's not being done for the parties. This is why this is a whole misdirection. It's like a magic trick, isn't it? They want people to go, oh, but it was only a bit of cake. No, he stood up and lied to Parliament. That's what he's got into trouble for. And then the committee that was looking into whether he lied to Parliament on purpose, he attacked them and called them a kangaroo court over and over again, and got his mates to join in, and got people to intimidate and harass the people in the committee. I mean, like, it's like going, someone has a pizza and they go out and murder someone, and it's like, oh, you keep going on about the pizza. It's like, no. It's the fact you murdered someone. That's what we're talking about here. It's got nothing to do with the freaking pizza, you idiot.
I think the committee even says it in its report. I think you've attacked one of the fundamental points of our democracy.
Yeah.
And that's
he misled the House. That's what he's done. I just want to read this from this on the BBC website. This is a Conservative voter in Uxbridge. Oh my God, called Caroline Macmillan. She says, I'm a Boris fan. It's very hard for me to give a view because I didn't lose anyone in the pandemic, which was nice. She didn't say the last bit. I just put that in. Oh, well, so it's very hard for me to give a point of view. So she gives a point of view anyway. From my point of view, I like him and they need to let it go. But that's my opinion. I think he's the best of the bunch. I think he's been stitched up rotten. Mate, people walk amongst us.
I know.
What was it of their generation? Obviously, he's a little bit older than us. Lead in the petrol, lead in the pipes, lead in the paint, the nuclear tests, asbestos in everything. Everyone smoked everywhere all the time. I think there's an entire generation who's had the brains addled by all the toxins they've inhaled in their lifetime.
Well, the thing is, if you're an avid reader of Conservative Home, one of the best comedy websites online,
Yes, can't argue
you
with
will
that.
very often see articles bemoaning the fact that the Conservatives got rid of Margaret Thatcher.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, hold on a second. You ditched Margaret Thatcher back in the 80s and she's died, but you're still complaining.
I had someone on
This
my
day you got rid of her.
Ollie, I had someone the other day going on about Gordon Brown selling off the freaking gold like in the year 2000 or something, because we can't set the value of gold. It's a pointless asset to have. If we were Papua New Guinea or South Africa and we actually had gold mines and we could make some more gold, that'd be great, but we're completely beholden to the international price of gold. And we're like, oh, but it went up. It went up after the credit crunch. It went up. I'm like, great. Okay, well,
Yep.
that's wonderful. It would have. We could have made a few £billion, and then you look at them, the Tories, £37 billion on a test and trace app that didn't even bloody work.
Mm.
And they're still going on about ancient history. Oh, the last
Wow.
time Labour were in, they sold off our gold. They did. Oh,
They're
I love
obsessed
my
with it.
gold teeth.
They're
Gordon Brown,
obsessed
he
with
stole.
past on this. And
He stole me gold
I think you'll still see a decade from now, you'll still see members of the Conservative Party bemoaning the fact of, oh, we got rid of Boris Johnson, like the
Yeah.
the best thing that ever happened to the Conservative Party. We got rid of him.
Yeah.
You're like, well, this is 10 years later. Why are you still bemoaning the fact that you got rid of Boris Johnson? What's going on?
It's going to be interesting the next few days and few months, because Rishi Sunak's in one hell of a bind, because he has to appease both sides of his party that is deeply unpopular and deeply divided, and it's just been controversy after controversy, and they're going to get obliterated in the next election. If they don't, I'm leaving. I'm just leaving. I can't be dealing with this anymore. I can't be dealing with this woman who owns a bookstore in Uxbridge who thinks that he was stitched up. I was like, oh. But that's what gets through. That's what gets put in the newspapers that they read.
Yeah. It's insane, but this is the state of the Conservative Party at the moment. It's completely bananas, and it's something that the upper party, that the actual Conservative HQ has never paid attention to. It's never paid attention to its voters who have voted in people like Lee Anderson.
Yeah.
And you're like,
Leanderthal.
and they've slowly pushed
Gullis.
the party to where it is.
To the extremes.
It's
Jonathan Gullis, the posh howler monkey. Do you know howler monkeys? If you go too close to them, they wee on you, and if you get that close, they'll poo in the hands and throw it at you out the tree. If you see a troop of howler monkeys, don't go close to take a photo, because they will literally poo in their hands and throw it at you. And that's Jonathan Gullis all over. Don't go too close to him.
Expert opinion.
Yeah, but then you've got other stuff like, isn't Pincher, although he's not a Tory MP anymore because he lost the whip, he's still an MP, isn't he? This is a guy who was effectively sacked for sexual assault. He's still an MP. I mean, the poor people in his constituency. Is it Tamworth that he's the MP of? I can't remember, but
I think
it's like imagine you are a constituent and you've been abused in some way. How would you take that up with him? He's supposed to be your representative, and the guy's a sex pest. I mean, the whole lot of them, they all need to go. All of them, just get out. I don't want the Tory party to exist anymore.
I'm just having a look up. He only announced in April of 2023 that he would actually stand down at the next general election.
We should stand down straight away. He should have stood down already. I don't have much sympathy for the people of Tamworth because he voted him in the first place. But at the same time, there's got to be a lot of people who didn't vote him in. But yeah, we just need these people out urgently. I keep having this argument with people who are like, the Labour Party doing this, Labour Party doing that. And I'm like, I don't care at the moment. I just want the Tories out. Just get them out, and then we can go after Labour and say, "Oi, do what we want you to do." But number one thing is not just to win the next general election, but just absolutely obliterate the Tories in the next election. I'd really like to see a stitch up between the Lib Dems, the Greens, and Labour, just to make sure that the Tories get as few seats as possible.
Yeah,
I think that would be
fantastic. I agree with you on that. I think there's a lot of potential of that happening. I think the polls do show a lot of that, but in terms of sort of the tactical voting, I think we saw in the local elections that finally the message about if you vote tactically you can beat the Tories seems to have broken through.
Yeah.
So we'll see if that comes through in a general election. The big thing that will come into play in this upcoming next general election will be, probably for the first time in a long time, is that you have Conservative voters that will, first of all, not go out and vote. They'll stay at home.
Yeah.
And then you'll have Conservative voters who will vote for the Lib Dems or they will vote Labour.
Yeah.
And that will be big.
Yeah.
Because we talk, again, I went through a sort of an article they did about, who's the other guy that quit as well next to Boris Johnson? What's his name? Chris
Matt Hancock?
Yeah, no, not Matt Hancock.
There was Chris Pincher. There was Owens, what's his name, who got kicked out, wasn't there?
No, he just resigned with Boris Johnson. He was one of the
the other person who resigned along with Nadine, who hasn't resigned. I don't know. It was some no mark.
Yeah. He's up in what is called the North Blue Wall, and they were talking to residents there, and they were like, "Well, anyone but a Tory." And if that is the message that's being sent up there in that northern blue wall, that tend to be very much like fortresses in a sea of red. Rishi Sunak's in big trouble. He's in
Richmond, isn't he? Which is Yorkshire as well.
Yeah.
Yorkshire, Lincolnshire. I think probably Lincolnshire's going to be the last sort of holdout of that Tory nuttiness, and that's probably more to do with Brexit.
Nigel Adams, that was it.
Nigel Adams,
Thank you, Bakura.
That's the chap. But Phil's put out his video. Boris Johnson guilty of multiple contempts. Yeah, that's just gone out on a different biased channel. So watch that after this. But did you listen to James O'Brien this morning?
Yes, I was listening to him. Like I say, he was in full swing.
It was beautiful. It was a beautiful thing to see. But this is all happening as well in the same week that Trump's been hauled in front of the court and had to plead not guilty for the third time in as many months.
Hey, it's been a week. It really has been a week especially for comeuppance for both Johnson and It's been such a wonderful week.
Do you know what? One of my first thoughts was like, this is the first time this happened on a Thursday instead of a Friday. Because I always think If I Got News for You is recorded on a Thursday, and they keep missing stuff because it happens on a Friday. And I'm like, why didn't they record it on a Friday and it goes out Saturday night? Wouldn't that make more sense? Because nothing happens on a Saturday except the footy. Do you know what I mean? Like, you're pretty safe if you record it Friday evening to go out Saturday evening, but they insist on having it going out on a Friday night. But yeah, so I think they'll be able to talk about it.
Yeah, I think Thursdays because they want to get MPs on sometimes, and of course Thursdays tend to be when the MPs will go home to their constituencies. So that's when they'll tend to sort of do the recording for it on the sort of Thursday evenings. When they tend to do it, so they can get the MPs and then they can go home to their constituencies afterwards. So that's why I tend to record it on Thursday.
It's just an absolute farce, though, isn't it? I mean, this where we are right now. What's about? I'm just talking about like the way that politics has gone in the last few years. I want it to go back. I was talking to Phil about this before we started the show this morning. Talking about like when it does all settle down, when we do have a Labour government, what are we going to do? Like, as YouTubers? Like, there's just going to be nothing to discuss. Or is that wishful thinking?
It's going to be this is it, because I've wondered about this myself. What do we do on this? And part of me, I said, is I've always wanted Labour to be a lot more bold in its policy making. So I'll go back to this for you though. It gets better. I've always said I want it to be more bold. So my big policy, I've always said that Labour could do that would be amazing, and Ed Miliband agrees with me on this point, which I'm really glad about, is the decarbonisation of this British steel industry. Now, if we could do that, and you would put the money into doing it, I think it would take something about 20 to 25 years to do fully. But if you did it, Britain would be, I think, maybe one of like the first countries in the world to be producing carbon neutral steel.
Yeah.
And that would be massive for our steel industry, because not only would you be protecting current steel industry jobs, you would expand the current steel industries where they currently are at the moment, all in those left behind communities. And you would probably secure future jobs in those areas as well.
Well, this is why we need to have these channels to be able to communicate with Labour. Get Labour MPs on our channels, chat with them, get them on Labour Social and things like that, so we can actually put these things across. I remember a few months ago I was at the Fabian conference in London, and I got a chance to chat to Seb Dance, who used to be an MEP, and now he's the Deputy Mayor for Transport in London. I think that's his title. And I was talking about how crap the bus situation was in London if you're coming in from another city, like National Express or Megabus. All those buses pretty much, and the Flix buses that go into Europe, Eurolines, they all go to this old, crappy, too small building, the Victoria bus station, which is incredibly polluted. The buses have to travel down Oxford Road. Do you know what I mean? Was it Oxford Street? Oxford Road in Manchester. Oxford Street, and it's like it's a really bad setup. And he said to me, no one's ever mentioned this before. He talks about transport all the time, but it's always about HS2. It's always about the underground. It's always about the ferries, and no one ever goes, hang on, I can't afford to get the train into London. What about the coaches, where they end up? And it was one of those moments where you think, how can no one have mentioned this? Like, how can no one have brought this up? But then who's lobbying for the people who get on buses?
Yeah, well, exactly. You don't see that a lot, do you? I mean, Andy Burnham, I think, is probably the only person that's doing anything in that realm. Obviously, he's trying to bring
Steve Rotherham in Liverpool
obviously,
as well.
And I think who's the new North Yorkshire woman? I can't remember her name now either.
Yeah,
but she's doing the same thing as well. All the sort of regional Labour mayors are now trying to bring all those back into sort of public ownership.
Good, but I mean, it's that, isn't it? You can't have social mobility unless you've got physical mobility, and taking the only form of transport available away from people, especially in rural areas or in the outskirts of cities and things, it's cruel. It's the equivalent of putting people under house arrest. Anyway, I feel like we've gone off on a massive tangent here, Ollie.
We have.
Back to the report. I'm gonna have to sign off in a little bit because I do have to go home and do the washing.
There we go. Let's get cracking through this report. Let's go over the introduction and the summary. We'll go through that. We'll probably skip part 2 because I'm guessing, although we might just read the first part of it, but I don't think we'll go too deep into that. What he was told by others. We'll have a look at those, what they were told by others. And then I think the big point, of course, will be point 4. Misleading the House. Misleading conclusions. Was it contempt? Recommended sanction. I think that part we're going to read in full.
Well, listen, Ollie, I'm going to head off. So, I'll still be in the chat, though. So I'll say hello to people as you go on. But we'll jump in the car and go home. And I think Ben wants to do his video today. So he kind of wants me to get out of here. He's not even paying attention. He's just sitting there. He's just woken up. Anyway, so big day for British politics. One of the big beasts in the Tory party has well and truly been toppled, and I hope he'll never get up again.
Yeah, we can only hope for that. Like I say, and that's my big worry. People have proclaimed, this is the end of Boris Johnson before, and well, he's managed to survive. But is this the final stake in the heart of that will finally get him? Who knows?
What I'll say before I go is, in the past, what he's done hasn't really affected the people who support him.
Hmm.
So if you look at like his lies that he told about Brexit, well, if you wanted Brexit, you don't care. If you look at the, lying about having an affair, lying about it, his mistress having his abortions and all that kind of stuff, it doesn't affect the people who support him. Lying to his wives, lying to his editors, having an affair with a woman he gave £128,000 of British taxpayers' money to, while his wife was apparently being treated for cancer. That doesn't affect people. But this is something where I thought it was interesting, that woman on the BBC website saying, I didn't lose anyone. Enough people did lose someone. And I think that is something that will always hang over him, like the fact that he was partying while the rest of us couldn't be with our loved ones.
I think that's what will happen. Will it stick? How will this stick with him? And will it continue to stick with the Conservatives? Because at the moment, even now, there's still no announcement from Rishi. Number 10 at the moment, for a quick update, they have declined the calls for Johnson to lose his
He's hiding he's under the table. He's hiding under the table. Yep. Oh my God.
He's declined to lose the MPN allowance, and of course to repay the legal inquiry fees as well.
Sorry, who's declined?
Number 10, the official spokesperson. He said, when it comes to honours, it is a long-standing convention that the Prime Minister has abided by the convention. That's not going to change. Right. He said that there were no plans to force Johnson to repay the money spent by the government or to remove his allowance as an ex-PM.
That's like £120,000 a year,
Yeah.
That's 5 or 6 times the average bloody wage in this country for being the worst Prime Minister. Anyway, right. How many people are dead? 227,000 people dead through COVID under this Tory government. Anyway, I'll leave you on that happy note, but at least, hopefully, fingers crossed, this is the end of him. I'm sure it'll crop up again, as part of the reform movement.
Oh, yeah. Well, haven't you heard he might be going to CNN?
I hate looking at him. I hate it. It's like Trump, when you get you want to share a story about them, but you just don't want to share the picture of them.
Yeah.
It makes me skin crawl.
And like I say, I still think he might become a YouTuber. I really think he will.
Oh my God!
It's honestly, he doesn't, like I say, if he's got that amount of money coming in, he doesn't have to do any of the technical stuff. He just pays someone to do it for him. There's enough, templates in America for him to copy.
Oh God, the Boris Johnson experience. Pass the sick bucket. All right, Ollie. Take care, mate. Good luck with it all. See you soon.
All right. See ya. Oh, right. So, I've finished my drink on that note. So I'm going to have to go and refresh my glass first and foremost before we get into this, because, like I say, it's a pretty warm day and my throat is drying out really quick. So we're just going to take a quick break. So, like I say, refresh your glasses. And when we come back, we'll be going over the report. Like I say, we're going to go into the summary. We'll probably read the first part of the rules and guidance of what Mr. Johnson knew or saw. And then, of course, we'll go over just briefly what Mr. Johnson was told by others or what he told the House. And then, of course, I think the big one that we will definitely be going over is point 4. And then, of course, point 5, which is Mr. Johnson's resignation as a PM and his attack upon the committee. And then, of course, we'll go over, I think, fully the conclusion and, of course, the recommendations of what the committee is proposing. And then all the rest is pretty much just the appendices and whatever. So that's the plan we've got, and we'll be going over that in a moment. So, like I say, stay tuned. And, of course, we'll see you all in a moment. So, here we go. And we're back. So welcome back. Thank you very much once again for joining me on this very, very interesting afternoon. Of course, the Partygate, well, finally dropped. It finally dropped. And of course, this has been completely damning straight up against Boris Johnson. And like I say, if you've probably seen some of the stuff that's floating around by now, you know just how bad this is. But we're going to go over, like I say, we're going to go quickly into sort of the introduction. We'll then briefly go over part 2, bit of, again, part 3, but again, part 4 is what we're really interested in, and especially part 5 as well. That's really the meat of some of this stuff. So we're going to go and kick off straight into that. So I'm going to go straight into the summary. Well, no, hang on, is that it? Oh. Oh, here we are. Not even on the page that the table of content said it was on, but never mind. So, summary. On the 21st of April, 2022, the House of Commons, without division, referred to the Committee of Privileges of a matter concerning the conduct of the Right Honourable Boris Johnson MP, the member of Uxbridge and South Ruislip. That is, whether he had misled the House and whether that conduct amounted to contempt. This inquiry goes to the very heart of our democracy. Misleading the House is not a technical issue, but a matter of great importance. Our democracy is based on people electing members of Parliament, not just to enable the government to be formed, but to support and to scrutinise legislation to hold the executive account for its actions. Our democracy depends on MPs being able to trust what ministers tell them in the House of Commons is the truth. If ministers cannot be trusted to tell the truth, the House cannot do its job, and the confidence of the public in our democracy is undermined. When a minister makes an honest mistake and then corrects it, that is democracy working as it should. Hang on, there we go. So, there, I'm just moving it just to make sure I can see chat as well, so I can see you all talking. So, number 3. So, on the 19th of July, 2022, the committee resolved how it would conduct its inquiry. On the 21st of July, 2021, the committee published a report setting out its procedure. The committee has, at all times, followed the laws and customs of Parliament. The fundamental procedure is the government is standing by its orders of and precedent of the House, and it is procedural resolution of the committee set out the detailed process designed to both be rigorous in its inquiries and fair to Mr. Johnson. Neither the government nor any member has proposed to the House that the procedure should be altered or set out how this would be done. The answers to the opinions of Mr. Johnson's legal advisers criticising that procedure to the extent not previously published by this committee are set out in Annex 1 in this final report. The criticisms are without merit. Oof. That's very interesting. We might have a very brief read of that at later on as well. So, all the evidence of which the committee has relied, including that of Mr. Johnson, has been given on oath, that is, with a signed statement of truth where the evidence is in writing. The committee has disclosed to Mr. Johnson all the documents that have been submitted to the inquiry without any redaction. Mr. Johnson knows the identity of all witnesses. And bear in mind, that's quite deadly. If Mr. Johnson knows all those witnesses' names, there's one thing for sure you can know about Boris Johnson. And it's Boris Johnson loves taking revenge. And oh boy, will Johnson have his revenge on some people. Because if he thinks they, did him in any way, shape, or form, Johnson will be out for revenge. Some way, shape, or form, he will get it. he is a creature of habit, and there's one thing he loves doing most of all, and that is taking revenge. So if you were a witness and you gave evidence to this inquiry, be careful of Boris Johnson. Be careful of what? Be careful of what Boris's Johnsoning gifts. So we'll see. But watch out. So, at his request, and as part of a fair procedure, Mr. Johnson was given notice of all the issues that arose from the evidence submitted to the committee, so that he might provide his own written evidence. Mr. Johnson availed himself of the opportunity to give written evidence, and in addition, gave oral evidence at the hearing on the 22nd of March 2023. Mr. Johnson was then subsequently given the opportunity to provide further written evidence, as he did on the 22nd of May 2023. The provisional conclusions of the committee were delivered to Mr. Johnson on the 8th of June so that he could respond. There is no matter upon which the committee has reported that Mr. Johnson has not had the opportunity to answer or comment upon. In our inquiry, we examined what Mr. Johnson had said to the House about gatherings in number 10, and whether he had said to the House was correct or not. If a statement was misleading, we considered whether it was a genuine error or intentional or reckless, and whether the record was corrected comprehensively and in good time. Number 6, we establish that Mr. Johnson had knowledge of the COVID rules and guidance, had knowledge of the breaches of rules and guidance that occurred in number 10, and misled the House. 1. When that guidance was followed completely in number 10 and the rules and guidance were followed at all times, the events in number 10 were within the rules and guidance, and the rules and guidance had been followed at all times when he was present at gatherings. When he failed to tell the House about his own knowledge of the gatherings, where the rules of guidance had been broken. When he said he relied repeatedly on assurances that the rules had not been broken, the assurances had received were not accurately represented by him to the House, nor were the appropriate to be cited to the House as an authoritative induction of number 10's compliance with COVID restrictions. When he gave the impression that there needed to be an investigation by Sue Gray, he could not answer questions when he had personal knowledge that he did not reveal. When he purported to correct the record but instead continued to mislead the House, and by continuing denials of this committee. He was deliberately disingenuous when he tried to reinterpret his statements to the House to avoid their planned meeting, to reframe the clear impression that he intended to give, namely, when he advanced the unsustainable interpretations of the rules and guidance to advance the argument that the lack of social distancing at gatherings was permissional, with the exceptions allowed for gatherings, and when he advanced the legally improvisational reasons to try and justify the gatherings. When we took written evidence, we submitted with his statements of truth from witnesses and present at the relevant times to inform us that Mr. Johnson would have known at the time of the statements to the House, and we heard oral evidence under oath from Mr. Johnson. In response to Mr. Johnson's proposed reliance on material that was not supported by a statement of truth, we ourselves obtained further evidence on his behalf. So bear in mind, you've just had this here straight from the committee. We have gone out of our way to try and find evidence on Boris Johnson's behalf. We have gone out of our way to specifically go and find evidence that backs him up of what he is saying. And yet Johnson still calls this a kangaroo court. So, not supported by the statement of truth, we obtained ourselves by further evidence on his behalf. We relied only on first-hand evidence and not on hearsay. We considered evidence supplied by the government, including emails, WhatsApp messages, and photographs. We received a limited number of WhatsApp messages from Mr. Johnson, and we paid a visit to number 10 to inspect for ourselves the location of the various gatherings to which Mr. Johnson referred in the House. We considered all the evidence that we received and came to the conclusion about the facts. We took into account the facts which are not in dispute because they are matters of public record, for example. The words used in the rules and guidance, the words used by Mr. Johnson to answer questions of the House, the public statements made by Mr. Johnson, e.g., the press briefings at number 10, and of course the dates of the gatherings. In respect to the factual issues which Mr. Johnson has disputed in his written and oral evidence, we gave him notice of the fourth report to be likely to be issued arising out of the evidence that we have received. We looked at each of the disputes and questions, and we put that dispute to him in the oral hearing. We also considered his answers alongside all the other evidence. We came to our conclusion that about the facts, having regard to the inquiry and hang on. Oh, sorry, it's just a very warm day. Oh, there we go. About the reliability, including the consistency of the evidence that we received, and the most important examples of the facts that we were disputed, and those relating to the gatherings which Mr. Johnson had attended. That is, what he would have known about because he was there, what he saw, what he said, what the gathering was for, and the facts relating to the assurances that we received from Jack Doyle and James Slack, who were successively appointed as Downing Street Director of Communications by Mr. Johnson. We established what Mr. Johnson knew about the rules of guidance from his own public statements. This was important because, in his evidence to us, Mr. Johnson assured us that the meaning of the rules of guidance was different from the understanding of the reasonable person from his previous public statements. Having come to the conclusion about the facts, we then considered that these conclusions, with Mr. Johnson's statements to the House and his evidence to us about those statements, we concluded he misled the House. We consider the nature and the extent of Mr. Johnson's culpability in misleading the House. In coming to the conclusion that Mr. Johnson had deliberately misled the House, we have considered his repeated and continuing denials of the facts. For example, his refusal to accept that there was any insufficient effort to enforce social distancing. At the gatherings, where a lack of social distancing is documented in official photographs, and that he neither nor saw heard anything that alerted him to the breaches of what occurred. The frequency of which he closed his mind to those facts and to what was obvious. So eventually, the only conclusion that could be drawn was that he was both deliberately closing his mind. The fact that he sought to then rewrite the meanings of the rules and guidance to fit his own evidence, for example, his assertion that, quote, imperfect social distancing was perfectly acceptable when there was no mitigations in place rather than cancelling a gathering or holding it online, and his assertion that a leaving gathering or even a gathering to boost morale was a lawful reason to hold a gathering. So, yeah, this is them stating, yeah, this is why we found him guilty. So, yeah. Oh, this is so good to read. This is so good to read. Because I will tell you now, I was slightly worried that maybe the committee might be split, that maybe they'd be convinced by Johnson. But to be honest, that has not happened. This was pretty much unanimous in their regards on this. So, yeah, they pretty much all found him guilty. So where were we? Yes. After his own, after the event realizations, for example, and the nature of the extent of the assurances that he received, the words used, the purposes of the assurances, who they then came from, the warning he received about them from the then Martin Reynolds, his principal private secretary, and his failure to take the advice from others, whose advice he would have been authoritative, he viewed about his own fixed penalty notice that he was baffled as to even why he received it is instructive. We came to the view that some of Mr. Johnson's denials and explanations were so disingenuous. Oof. That says everything. Yeah. We came to the view that some of Johnson's denials and explanations were so disingenuous that they were, by their very nature, deliberate attempts to mislead the committee and the House, and while others demonstrated the deliberation because of the frequency of which he had closed his mind to the truth. Oomph. Right there. But to be honest, that's Boris Johnson all over. Of course, he's going to deny and give his own explanation of what the truth is. So, of course, that was going to happen. I'm really glad that they're calling that out. I'm really glad that they're calling that out. So, for these reasons, we conclude that Mr. Johnson's conduct was deliberate and that he committed a serious contempt of the House. We share our provisional conclusions with Mr. Johnson on the 8th of June and invited him to make further representations. On the 9th of June, before the committee had compiled its deliberations and delivered its report to the House, Mr. Johnson made a public statement responding to the criticism and criticizing the inquiry and the committee's personal conclusions. That was in breach of the express requirements of confidentiality imposed by the committee and ordinary requirements that committee material is confidential unless and until the committee determines that it should be published. This was done before the committee had come to its final conclusions. At that time, when Mr. Johnson knew the committee would not be in a position to respond publicly, Mr. Johnson was conduct in a way of making this statement is in itself very serious contempt. So that's 2 counts of contempt. First of all, of misleading the House deliberately as they are finding him over the allegations of the party. Then, of course, about his public statements of making public information about the committee before it can make its final deliberation. That is interesting. That's 2 counts of contempt against Boris Johnson. No wonder he got the 90-day suspension. No wonder. So, the question which the House asked the committee is whether the House had been misled by Mr. Johnson, and if so, whether that conduct had amounted to contempt. As it was for the House to decide whether it agrees with the committee, the House as a whole makes that decision. Motions arising from reports from this committee are debatable and amendable. The committee has provisionally concluded that Mr. Johnson deliberately misled the House and should be sanctioned for it by being suspended for a period that would trigger the provisions for a recall of MPs of the Act of 2015. And in light of Mr. Johnson's conduct in committing a further contempt on the 9th of June, the committee now considers that if Mr. Johnson were still a member, he should be suspended from the service of the House for 90 days for repeated comments for seeking to undermine the parliamentary process by first of all, A, deliberately misleading the House, B, deliberately misleading the committee, C, breaching confidence, D, impugning the committee and thereby undermining the democratic process of the House, and E, being complicit in a campaign of abuse and attempted intimidation of the committee. We recommend that he should not be entered into for a former member's pass. So, effectively, what they're saying there in that final line is that if you are a former MP, you can come and go into the House, into sort of Westminster. So they are permanently banning Boris Johnson from the House of Commons. So unless Boris Johnson gets re-elected, he cannot re-enter the Westminster. To be honest, they did not recommend suspension, like I say. I think I was looking through the arguments of because obviously the SNP member wanted harsher treatment, and I think the committee I don't know if there's a report, but I think someone said That's not really for us to decide. That's for the Conservative Party to decide. So that's why, obviously, they couldn't say, get rid of him completely. Like I said, at the end of the day, it is for, Parliament to vote on. Like I say, if Mr. Johnson was still an MP, then a motion would be put forward to ban Mr. Johnson for 90 days. But they have also put forward the recommendation for him to be to lose any former member's pass as well. So we've got 2 contempts of court and him permanently being not allowed into the House of Commons with a former member's pass. That, from a committee, is as pretty close as you can get to coming to the maximum amount of punishment that they can do. So this committee has well and truly done an incredible job in their reporting. That's for sure. So that's the summary. Let's go over them. What else have it's got? That's the introduction, the establishment of the inquiry. Let's go over the importance of the inquiry, because I think this is again important to go over. So the importance of this inquiry. Why is this committee so important? Why is this inquiry so important? I think that's very often a question that you will see people ask sometimes. So this inquiry goes into the very heart of our democracy. Misleading the House is not a technical issue, but a matter of great importance. Our democracy is based on people electing members of parliament, not just to enable a government to be formed and supported, but to scrutinize legislation and to hold the executive to account for its actions. The House proceeds on the basis of what it is told by ministers is accurate and truthful. The House expects a proactive candor and transparency. Our democracy depends on MPs being able to be trusted so that what ministers will tell them in the House is the truth. If ministers cannot be trusted to tell the truth, then the House cannot do its job, and the confidence of the public in our democracy is undermined. So, this is why this committee is so important. There's going to be a lot of people probably in the coming days, probably from Boris Johnson, his allies, certainly in certain sections of the press. They're going to be saying this committee is unfair, etc., etc. This is a complete stitch-up. But remember of what was just said there. Why this committee is important. People elect MPs, and then MPs represent the people. They scrutinize legislation. They hold the legislative to account. And they expect ministers, so that's members of the current government sitting on the front bench, to tell them the truth. Because if they are not told the truth, how can they do their jobs effectively? If they cannot do their jobs effectively like that, that damages people's faith then in our own democracy. This is why, and I agree with the committee, it is so important. This cuts right to the heart of it. That Boris Johnson was such a liar in this regard. It has really damaged our democracy. Massively so. And I very much agree with the committee on that. So the House expects all members to act with integrity, which is why we refer to each other as honourable members. Untruthful or misleading statements from ministers are more damaging even than those from the opposition or backbenchers. And backbench members, because they frustrate and impede the House in its vital role of scrutinising the government. Whenever the case, the minister who is alleged to have misled the House is the Prime Minister, the head of the government, and the effect of any misleading and exceptional serious both for both practical and impact on the public confidence. And because the Prime Minister sets the standard for all the ministers of the Crown, he is how they account to the House. And that's very true. That's very true. And that is something a lot of people really, really made the case about this at the time, that Boris Johnson is setting the standards. And it is no wonder that we have seen so much corruption coming in from all this. Yeah, exactly, Chris. That's who could be very well be next on this. But the thing is, what you should do as a minister, obviously, if you said something untruthful or at the time you learned to be untrue, you can go back and correct the record. This is something Boris Johnson never did. In fact, I think one of the things that people have been saying on air, as this has been sort of going around this morning, believe it was Stanley Baldwin. Stanley Baldwin committed a, quote, misled the House because he didn't know what the accurate number of, I think it was either bombers or fighter jets there were in regard to sort of fighting against the Luftwaffe at the time. And he was called out on that. Now, he said publicly, I thought what was true at the time. However, once I get the accurate information, I will go back and I will correct the record. And that's what he did. Hence why he didn't then go and have something like this happen to him. Because he went back and corrected the record. Boris Johnson never went back and corrected the record. And that's something I think if Suella Braverman gets called upon this, gets called out about these, about the lies she's telling about the immigration stuff at the moment, then she will have an opportunity. She will either say, she will either A, have to double down, or she will go back and correct the record. And chances are, very recently, when the government has been doing this, certainly for the past 10 or so years ago, they've done this literally right at the end of a close of day of Parliament where like no one's there. Said, yes, I'd just like to correct the record. This is it. There you go, Speaker. Job done. And I'm off. And that's it. But whether that will happen with Braverman, but I suspect she will. I know she's been pulling her own tricks as well recently. Yvette Cooper called her out on that as well. Yeah, and it's again, yeah, good point. The committee gave him the chance to correct the record, and he didn't. Even after all that, he didn't do it. So here we are. So it is inevitable, of course, that ministers make mistakes and inadvertently mislead. Again, everyone does it sometimes. Maybe you have misaccurate information. Maybe the information that you said wasn't necessarily true at the time, but was maybe true when you first got it. You just hadn't updated information. So you are expected to go back and correct the record, to do so at your earliest opportunity. And Boris Johnson just did not do that. So ministers are expected to correct the record at the earliest opportunity, and this happens routinely. When a minister makes an honest mistake and it is then corrected, that is democracy working how it should. There is no basis for any fear that requirement to be truthful with the House has a, quote, chilling effect on the ability for ministers to be candid with the House. The House will also understand that if a minister declines to answer, for example, on matters which relate to national security or market sensitivity, but misleading intentionally or recklessly, or refusing to answer legitimate questions, or failing to correct misleading statements, impedes the frustration and the functioning of the House, that is contempt. The subject on which Mr. Johnson is alleged to have misled the House could not have been more serious. The COVID-19 pandemic was one of the biggest crises our country has faced in generations and the greatest peacetime challenge in a century. It has disrupted lives, separated family and friends, closed businesses, damaged livelihoods, and most tragically of all, has been associated with the deaths of over 150,000 people in the UK. And in response, the interest of protecting public health, the government and Parliament imposed extensive restrictions on people's freedom. It has not been the purpose of this inquiry to examine the rights or the wrongs of the COVID rules and guidance, nor have we sought to repeat the inquiry commissioned by the then Mr. Johnson from the then second parliamentary secretary at the Cabinet Office, Sue Gray, into the conduct of individual members and officials into number 10. What the House mandated us to do was to investigate whether Mr. Johnson had told the truth to Parliament, to the best of his knowledge, about number 10's compliance with those rules and guidance. This inquiry has been about what was the truth, which is why it does go to the heart of trust and why other systems of accountability it depends. The committee is made up of members of Parliament who have been appointed by the role of the Commons. A political balance of the committee reflects in the House as far as possible. The committee comprises of 4 Conservatives, 3 opposition MPs, 2 from Labour, 1 from the Scottish National Party. Having said that, we leave our party interests at the door of the committee room and conduct our work in the interests of the House. That is what we have striven to do throughout this inquiry. So there you go. And I think, again, that is the importance of the inquiry. I think that's so much important to stress why this inquiry is so important, because you're going to be hearing, certainly from Boris Johnson, probably for the rest of the day, and certainly in a couple of corners of the media. I'm very interested to see if Conservative Home, in fact, let me check. Let me see if Conservative Home has done anything about this at the moment. No, not yet. Oh, no, here we are. So we've got link to the report. Oh, no, that's what we're reading. And then 6 points about privilege committee reported to Johnson. Let's have a look at what they would do. So, yeah, Conservative Home currently does have one, but it's mainly just the 6 points about what we're doing. It's the big 6 points everyone's talking about. Although they are talking about the pass. I haven't seen too much talk about that pass yet. Because, like I say, effectively, once he leaves Parliament and all his official MP duties are over, he's not allowed back into Parliament. Because normally, when you finish as MP, you actually get an ex-members pass, which allows you to go back in and out of Parliament for a while. Like I say, there's committee rooms, there's meetings. It acts as a bit of almost a bit of bit of fun, and that's been heavily criticised in the past. I have probably big problems about that pass being issued to past members anyway, because, like I say, it does give access to ex MPs to have access to current MPs. That could be seen as a bit of a problem. That could be a big lobbying problem. You see how that could be a bit of a problem. So, but the pass itself is probably a separate issue. We can probably discuss that probably at a later point. Procedures in this inquiry. We don't really need to go over that. Evidences inquiry. Don't really think we need to go on that because we know we've been over that. Oh yeah, this is the report stuff. I think we've been over this before. I don't think this is anything really new. No, 200 odd people. No, we've heard all this in the Sue Gray report. This isn't anything new. No, so I don't think anything in that evidence is new. Oh no, that might be new in his oral evidence. So the oral evidence is probably going to be new stuff. So this is in reflect to the garden party. So in his oral evidence, Mr. Johnson told us that he did not see Martin Reynolds' email inviting people to the gathering, which invited people to bring their own alcohol, and he was not aware of the contents of the email. We note that even if this was the case, Mr. Johnson would have become aware of Mr. Reynolds' email before giving evidence to us because it was leaked to the media in January of 2022 and referred to in Sue Gray's final report of May 2022. Notwithstanding this indication of the social purpose of the gathering, Mr. Johnson continues to maintain that it was essential for work purposes. Yep. That is very true, actually. Number 3. If you have a Conservative MP, get writing, get emailing them, get them on Twitter. If you follow them on Twitter, tell them they need to give Johnson the boot. But definitely, if you have a Conservative MP today, basically write them a letter expressing that you need to kick Johnson out of the Conservative Party, because essentially that is what you need to do. That is the one way you'll be able to permanently get rid of, because now at the moment, because Johnson has resigned as an MP, the only way he can again be fully sanctioned is if Rishi Sunak comes out and, well, he sanctions them. Well, Rishi Sunak comes out and stops Boris from standing again. That's one thing can happen. Or he kicks him out of the party. And only Rishi Sunak can do that. So it's about putting pressure on Conservative MPs to get Rishi Sunak to do that. Will he do it? I don't think he will. Bear in mind, we are, again, what was this? 10 o'clock, I think it went to. What, 1, 2, 3. We're almost 4 hours, maybe more than that, 4 or 5 hours now since it dropped, and still no word from Rishi Sunak about doing that. Like I say, at the moment, the last update on here was about 40 minutes ago. Don't think there's been anything new come out since. Let me see. I don't think there's anything new on the BBC. I don't know. Oh, of course, the well, to surprise, Johnson supporters have lashed out. So far, many Conservative MPs have held back from commenting publicly on the committee's findings. Although, like Michael Fabricant, of course, big Boris supporter, in our previous post, allies of the former PM have been quick to criticise the M. The former cabinet minister, Sir Simon Clarke, who was given a knighthood in his resignation honours list, has said that he was amazed at the harshness of today's report, saying, "I believed Boris before I believed, and I believed Boris before, and I believe him today." That's Simon Clarke, former cabinet minister, speaking. This punishment is absolutely extraordinary, to the point of sheer vindictiveness, and I will vote against this report on Monday, he tweeted. So now we know when the voting is going to be. So we'll see what that vote comes out like. But I very much think it's going to go through, but it'll be interesting to see who votes against it. Because again, you as Rishi Sunak are basically now being given a free pass to go, if you vote against this, you're having the whip removed. If he had a spine, this would not be a free vote. This would be, I'm putting a 3-line whip, all the Conservative MPs voting for this. That's what I would do. And if you vote against it, you've broken the 3-line whip. Thank you. The whip's now removed. You can't stand again as a Conservative MP. And as Graham was saying earlier, apparently now the Conservatives are trying to get their candidates in order for not just the upcoming by-elections, but potentially other seats as well. So there's now potential talks probably circulating about a snap general election coming as well. So another Bassett Law MP, Brendan Clark-Smith, said he was appalled by the spiteful vindictiveness of the overreaching conclusions. I'm backing fairness and justice, not kangaroo courts, he added. Education Secretary Gillian Keegan said that Johnson had made his decision. He made the decision to resign after he saw the report last week, while adding, Boris has achieved an awful lot. Downing Street would not be withdrawn onto the report, saying, in line with proper process, it is now for the House MPs to consider its findings. He's also rejected calls for his honours list to be rescinded. So, yeah. I think this could maybe tip them over into civil war. Maybe. It depends how many are willing to really do it, but we'll see. We'll see. Exactly. One angry pagan. Exactly. Copium. Copium to the max. That is what many of these Johnson supporters are going to be on today. Pure, unadulterated copium. So, let's go gatherings. This is all the evidence. But like I say, I think most of it, bar any of the oral evidence, is going to be new. In fact, hang on, copy. Tell you what, if you fancy reading along, I've just put the link to said document in there. If you fancy reading through that evidence yourself later, you can do so. Phonebox Chicken, I agree. I think this is the big question a lot of people are going to be asking. I'm trying to work out what is more damaging for the Tories, kicking Johnson out or leaving the door open for reselection. The general public have had enough of him, despite what loonies are on the TV. I think that's a good point. What is more damaging for them? Well, it's also what's also most damaging them not doing. Because if they don't kick Johnson out, in certainly the coming days, because this is going to dominate the news cycle, certainly until next Monday, until this vote happens. And Rishi Sunak will come under so much pressure. So much pressure on this. I think not kicking Johnson out is also going to have big consequences for them. And then, of course, if also Rishi Sunak, as you said, leaves that door open, he could be reselected. You're entirely right. He could be reselected because there are, as we said, the parliamentary party wants to move on from Johnson, but the non-parliamentary party, probably a great many of them. I don't know if there's any polling out there that it would exist to say, would you support Boris Johnson becoming an MP or not? Well, there might be in a couple of days. We'll see. It's just what happens. Does he block Johnson running again, or does he not? Because equally, that could have consequences or not. We've heard Jacob Rees-Mogg saying, if you block Boris from returning, it's civil war. It is unbelievable. Of course, the fact that if you are Rishi Sunak and you are a very weak prime minister and you have the opportunity to look strong, and bear in mind, Rishi Sunak and the Conservative HQ will be doing poll after poll after poll. And one of the things we'll be coming forward is saying just how Rishi looks weak compared to Boris Johnson. Why is he not dealing with Boris Johnson? This will just make him look even more weaker. And it's just, It just continues on and on and on. It really does. Yeah, Jacob Rees-Mogg and whose army? Exactly. Well, to be honest, it would be Jacob Rees-Mogg and probably that non-parliamentary army, because they've been threatening deselections to any MP, to any Conservative MP that backs this report on Monday. Will they be successful in calling those recall elections? Those things. It might be. Just depends how many Johnson supporters are in that area. It'll be interesting. Even if they fail, it'll still cause problems for them. Again, more evidence. Assertions. So this is Mr. Johnson's. Yeah, Mr. Johnson's assertions to the meaning of guidance. Oh, this is definitely new. So in his final submission to us, Mr. Johnson maintains that the guidance was in fact subject to his flexible interpretation. So the guidance, according to Johnson himself, it was all flexible. So the committee's interpretation is obviously wrong. And this is Boris Johnson, the committee. The guidance states, and is clear and expresses its terms, objective, ensuring workers maintain social distancing guidelines of 2 meters or 1 with risk mitigations where 2 is not viable. Wherever possible, including where on arrival and departing from work, while in work and when traveling between sites, the committee appears to be suggesting that wherever possible attaches to part of the text in parentheses, but not all of it, which is, in respect, an impossible reading of the sentence. You also entirely ignore the following paragraph, which states you must maintain social distancing in the workplace wherever possible. The position could not be clearer. The committee also referred on multiple occasions to the part of the guidance that said absolutely necessary participants should only be physically attending meetings. The committee appears to persist that this was an absolute requirement for all meetings. But with respect, that is also incorrect. As pointed out as to Sir Bernard, that this requirement is part of a list, the steps that would usually be needed. Clearly, a step that is usually needed is not one that must always be followed. So the issue is whether or not the guidance is contemplated that could be the circumstances in which it is not possible to maintain of the social distancing guidelines of 2 meters or 1 with the risk mitigation when the 2 meters are not viable. The guidance clearly did so. The guidance clearly equally indicated wherever the social distancing guidelines cannot be followed in full, even through redesigning a particular activity, businesses should consider whether the activity needs to continue for the business to operate. And if so, take all mitigating actions possible to reduce the risk of transmission to staff. The words, where possible, do not provide a blanket exemption to ignore the obligations in the guidance in respect to social distancing. The smart play would be to do for Starmer to tell all Labour MPs to abstain on the vote. I see the problem there. I don't think that would be good that wouldn't be a good move for Starmer, saying abstaining. Abstaining is mostly seen. It's mostly seen very, very much as you are not in favor of it, but you are not against it either. And it's almost like, well, I don't really want to do it. And it's a bit. So abstaining, I don't think would be a tactical move. I think Starmer gets all his, he tells, look, vote for this. And to be honest, I don't see a single Labour member voting against this committee's report. I really don't. But Starmer can come. I think if someone does, Starmer should come down hard on them, and then he can go, that is how you deal with a problem MP, Rishi. But yeah, we'll see what happens on Monday. We'll see what happens on Monday. Mr. Johnson's argument that no one raised concerns with him. Mr. Johnson argues that as proof as his honest belief that rules and guidance were followed in number 10, that no one raised any concerns with him. He told us in the oral evidence that while he does not remember being specifically assured by any senior civil servant about the rules or guidance within number 10, the interesting thing is that, to the contrary, nobody gave me any contrary advice. He also said, in the case that you mention, nobody came to me and said, we've got a problem with this one, you need to worry about this. In response to this, quote, argument from silence, we note that one official of Mr. Johnson's principal private secretary, Martin Reynolds, did in fact question directly with Mr. Johnson whether the guidance had been followed at all times. Other number 10 staff, including some of Mr. Johnson's most senior advisors, expressed concerns, albeit not directly to Mr. Johnson, either at the time of the gatherings or when the gatherings came to public attention, that they appeared prima facie in breaches of the rules of guidance. Junior officials also told us in evidence that they felt it was clear that the rules and guidance were not being followed in Downing Street, stating that number 10, despite setting the rules to the country, was very slow to enforce any rules in the building. The press office wine time Fridays continued throughout. The social distancing was not enforced. This was all part of a wider culture of not adhering to any rules, and number 10 was like an island in an oasis of normality. Lee Kane told us in the evidence that he saw the tone of the email invitation for the gathering on the 20th of May 2020 as clearly social and a breach of COVID guidance. We have evidence of WhatsApp messages sent by Jack Doyle in January of 2022 stating that he was struggling to come up with any way the gatherings of the 19th of June was in the rules. So Mr. Johnson also, of course, had personal knowledge of the gathering, see paragraphs 23 and 94 above, as well as particular responsibility in his role as Prime Minister to ensure that he understood the rules and guidance of his government, as well as directing the country to follow, not only to rely on others to provide unsolicited advice. Yeah. Gatherings, conclusion. So, we have set out and analysed evidence of the 6 gatherings. The establishes that Mr. Johnson had personal knowledge and also should have led him, at least to do after reflection, as gatherings succeeded gathering, to question whether the COVID rules and guidance were being complied with. For several of the number 10 gatherings, as we have detailed, Mr. Johnson has argued that it did not occur to him and that they were not in breach of the rules and guidance. This is despite the fact that he must have been aware of the number of people attending, of the absence of official work being done, and the absence of social distancing without visible mitigations. In each case, he argues that he genuinely believed that the events were covered by work-related exemption to the rules. He also argues that the efforts to socially distance and putting in the place of some mitigations were possible, albeit somewhere other than having the gatherings were taking place, and were sufficient with the compliance within the guidance. With regard to the rules, the gathering had to be essential or reasonably necessary for work purposes. The workplace, quote, thank you, leaving drink and birthday celebration, or even the motivational event is obviously neither essential nor reasonably necessary. And Mr. Johnson is adamant that he believed that all the events of which he attended and which he had direct knowledge were all essential. That belief, in which he continues to assert, has no reasonable basis in the rules and or the facts, and a reasonable person looking at the events and the rules would have known that would not have the belief that Mr. Johnson had professed. This is plain from the fact that around the UK during the period of pandemic restrictions, these events did not take place. The point is then reinforced by the exposure of the mocking Downing Street press conference video, which became public in December of 2021. When he asked about one of the gatherings that we had examined, that of the 18th of December 2020, and more generally, whether the Prime Minister should, quote, condone having a Christmas party. Mr. Johnson's then press secretary, Allegra Stratton, was unable to think of any credible response and was eventually embarrassed. But of course, eventually she had to resign about that. So 5 of these 6 events that we have focused on had a core purpose of thanking staff who had been working hard or raising morale following the departure of staff. Mr. Johnson, when asked when he would have condoned these gatherings for the purposes in other organizations, declined to say that he would. We also concluded in paragraphs 37 and 65 above, in view of Mr. Johnson's repeated exhortations to the public to follow the rules and guidance, including the importance that he attached to their being taken seriously, that we do not believe, if asked at the time, whether unsolicitedly distanced leaving dues to maintain staff morale were permitted on the rules and guidance. He would have been advised by the British public that they were. So he would have advised the British public that they were. Yeah. Oh, in respect to the 6th event, the celebrating of his birthday on the 19th of June 2020, we have no reason to think that the meeting that followed this event was anything other than a necessary work meeting. Mr. Johnson was then unable to actually provide a convincing reason as to why the prior gathering was reasonable and necessary for work purposes. Oh. With regard to the guidance, there is again no obvious social distancing that any events of such the committee has photographs, and with the direct evidence of the lack of knowledge of social distancing from witnesses, we have no evidence of substantive mitigations in place in the room and areas where the gatherings took place, save the 20th of May in the garden because it was in the open air. The mitigations described by Mr. Johnson do not relate to the activities compiled of. Again, at the very best of such marginal expectations as even not touching pens or passing things to each other, except, of course, alcohol. Oof. Oh. So again, what Mr. Johnson was told by others and what told the House was part by this part. So I think, how long have we been going now? Yeah, so we're coming up to 2 hours at the moment. So we're going to head, I think, straight to this is it, I think, misleading the House. I think this is the big one. So yeah, what is contempt? Recommend the sanction. Yeah, so this is the big part we're going to go through. So yeah, we're going to go through this. This is the big one. So the House resolution of the 21st of April 2022 cited some of Mr. Johnson's answers at PMQs on the 1st and 8th of December as appearing to amount to misleading the House, and referred the matter of Mr. Johnson's conduct to consider whether it amounted to contempt. Mr. Johnson himself, in the aftermath of the police issuing a fixed penalty notices and the publication of the Sue Gray report in May of 2022, has accepted the House was misled, and he told us in the oral evidence. There was a near universal belief at number 10 that the rules and guidance were being complied with. That is the general belief that that governed what I said in the House. And as soon as it was clear that I was in the wrong, and as soon as Sue Gray, the investigation and the Metropolitan Police investigation had concluded, I came to the House of Commons and I corrected the record as I promised I would. The questions we consider in this section of a report is whether the House may have been misled in ways which go beyond in which Mr. Johnson has acknowledged. In our 4th report, containing a summary of these issues, included to raise with Mr. Johnson in his oral evidence, we set out the evidence that the House of Commons may have been misled in the following ways, of which the committee will explore. We will now revise that section for the 4th report in the light of the full evidence that we have taken into the inquiry. In our opinion, the House was misled in each of the ways we have listed. Nope. Thank you very much, Maggie Pie. At least I did have plenty of throat sanitizer. Very true. That's very true. That's very true, they did. So anyway, as we're listed, we will set out below each category to deal with the category of misleading and the rest of the paragraphs in the present report and deal with them. and in some further comments where appropriate. We'll then consider a number of further instances in which Mr. Johnson has been disingenuous with the House and with us. So again, probably referring to his stuff, his oral evidence. We also continue the issue of Mr. Johnson's correction of the failure to correct the parliamentary record. In paragraph 110 of this written evidence, Mr. Johnson states, I believe that my statement to the House of Commons on the 25th of May, 2022, and the publication of the Sue Gray report and its placing in the Library of the House of Commons constituted a full correction of my honest and irrelevant misleading statements. In paragraph 108, he argues that his statement to the House on the 25th of May was his, quote, earliest opportunity at which he could make the necessary correction. When asked during all evidence on the 22nd of March whether he had wished again to reassert the guidance that had been followed at all times at which he was present at the gatherings and wished staff farewell, Mr. Johnson maintained that I, quote, see no reason to withdraw what I said on the 25th of May, and that he did not wish to correct the record. So, misleading conclusions. Using the category of misleading set out in paragraph 23 of the fourth report, we conclude that Mr. Johnson misled the House when he said on the 1st of December that all guidance was followed completely in number 10, when he said on the 8th of December that the rules and guidance were followed at all times, on the 12th of January when he said that events at number 10 were within the rules of guidance, and on the 25th of May when he said that the rules and guidance had been followed at all times when he was present at gatherings with staff farewells. That Mr. Johnson had misled the House when he failed to tell the House about his own knowledge of the gatherings where the rules of guidance had been broken. Mr. Johnson had misled the House when he said on the 8th of December that he relied upon repeated reassurances that the rules had not been broken. There is evidence that Mr. Johnson was assured by two individuals who had worked at number 10 and at the time that they did not think the gatherings of the 18th of December had broken the COVID rules. See paragraphs 136 through 144 and 176. However, we conclude that Mr. Johnson had personal knowledge about the gatherings, which he should have disclosed. Mr. Johnson concedes that there were no assurances about any gatherings compliance with the guidance and that was in place at the time, as opposed to the compliance with the COVID rules. Yet, Mr. Johnson gave the House the impression that those assurances had been overarching and comprehensive in respect of number 10's compliance with all COVID measures. The purported assurances that were not only about the gatherings of the 18th of December, but more generally about number 10's compliance with the rules and guidance. Yet Mr. Johnson gave the House the impression that those assurances had been overarching and comprehensive in respect of number 10's compliance with the COVID measures across the whole period of restrictions. In particular, we have received no evidence that any specific assurances were provided in relation to the gatherings of May 20th, 19th of June, and the 13th of November, 27th of November, and the 14th of January. We have examined in detail the context for the initial purported assurances was in response to a media inquiry and with the assertion that the COVID rules were then followed initially and then developed in haste without further investigation as the media line to take. We were then, therefore, not appropriate for Mr. Johnson to cite as an authoritative indication of number 10's compliance with COVID measures. The only two purported assurances of which there is firm evidence that he did not emulate from senior permanent civil servants or even governmental lawyers, but the first two media advisors. One whom was a personal political appointment by Mr. Johnson. The other purported assurances consisted only of what those individuals themselves believed about the compliance of the gatherings of the 18th of December within the rules. They were therefore not appropriate to be cited by an authority as indication of number 10's compliance with the COVID measures. So Mr. Johnson misled the House when he gave the impression that there was needed to be hang on, I've lost my place there. So Mr. Johnson misled the House when he gave the impression that there needed to be an investigation by the second parliamentary secretary to establish whether the rules and guidance had been broken before he could answer any questions to the House. While repeatedly making the statement to the House, he had personal knowledge that he did not reveal. So again, Boris, again, the idea that Boris didn't know about these parties or didn't know what was going on, that argument we will probably be seeing from many, Johnson himself, again, the parts of the media and even his own allies. That doesn't stand. None of that holds water. In fact, to be honest, this entire report pretty much demolishes any idea that Mr. Johnson did nothing wrong. So we additionally find that Mr. Johnson misled the House when he purported to correct the record on the 25th of May. We have concluded above that his statement on that date to the House COVID rules and guidance were followed while he was in attendance at a farewell gatherings at number 10 was misleading. And as such, it represented a conclusion of his previous misleading of the House and seeking to try and present it as a correction when it was itself misleading. Oh my word. So Johnson lied to the House and then went to correct the record, but instead of correcting the record, further lied to mislead the House. Just what is going on here? It's absolutely insane. Absolutely insane. There you go. So again, where are we? Yeah. So yeah, and we also further conclude. So yeah, more stuff. So we further conclude that Mr. Johnson has been disingenuous with the committee. So this is going against stuff with the committee. This is going to get interesting in ways which amount to misleading, and as follows. By adopting a narrow and restrictive interpretation of the assertions he gave to the House in PMQs on the 1st and 8th of December, which is at odds with the general impressions he clearly wished to give the House that all rules and guidance at number 10 had been followed at all times. By claiming that when he referred to having been repeatedly assured, by repeatedly, he meant merely on more than one occasion, we note that it is contrary to the common English usage. It is clear that when Mr. Johnson used the term repeatedly at PMQs, he wished his audience to suppose that there had been multiple occasions at which assurances had been given, rather than merely on one, and as suggested by our evidence, possibly as few as two. So even Boris Johnson misusing the English language to try and weasel his way out of this. Yes, I've had repeated assurances. I've only been told twice, but that's repeatedly, right? Right? Surely. So, by undertaking to provide the committee with the name of another person of who had previously provided assurances and then failing to do so. So, okay, that's very interesting. That's incredibly interesting when you said that. So, by stating the oral evidence session that the committee had withheld from publication, quote, the evidence of which I rely on, which answers the charges, and a large number of extracts which I rely on in my defense. But then, when the committee had facilitated the production of that evidence accompanied by the statements of truth, failing to make any use of it in any of his subsequent final submissions, it strongly suggests that Mr. Johnson, quote, did not rely on the evidence at all, but was simply using it as a gamble to try and criticize the committee in the public hearing. Oomph. It's not just surprisingly decent. This goes well and above surprisingly decent. This, to be honest, is amazing. Amazing what the committee have done on this regard. So, by trying to advance an unsustainable interpretation of guidance in order that he can define the implications of the evidence showing a lack of social distancing, by being able to deny that he used the words, probably the most unsocially distanced gathering in the UK right now, while not admitting that he had said them, which has the ring of avoidance about it. So it goes on to what is contempt. I think that's just setting out a definition. Yeah, it's just setting out what contempt means. Of course, I think they're doing that for Johnson's personal use. So we've given very careful consideration to the question of whether Mr. Johnson had misled the House recklessly or intentionally. He himself told us that, I am here to say to you, hand on heart, I did not lie to the House, whose those statements were then made in good faith and on the basis of what I honestly knew to believed at the time. Mr. Johnson argues that whether or not the COVID-19 rules and guidance were breached, the gatherings that he attended, he saw or aware of at number 10, and he continues to maintain in the case of the 6 gatherings that we investigated that they were not breached. He himself, along with many others at number 10, genuinely believed that they were complying with the rules and guidance. To the great extent of his defense depends on whether Mr. Johnson genuinely believed that the gatherings were the work events or even satisfied the criteria of the rules of such events before June of 2022 for essential work purposes, or from June of 2020, reasonable and necessary for work purposes. And the criteria in the guidance that if social distancing cannot be observed for such an event, it needs to continue for the business or organization to operate. We have noticed that Mr. Johnson was not willing to say that, if asked, would he have been advised the general public that the work intends solely to raise morale to satisfy that criteria, as we have set out in paragraph 177 above. Our conclusion is that it is unlikely on the balance of probabilities that Mr. Johnson, in the light of the circumstantive direct personal experience of those events, could have genuinely believed that the rules and guidance were being complied with. We have all set out in paragraphs 188 and 199 above the list of the ways in which we consider Mr. Johnson has misled the House or been disingenuous in his responses to our inquiry. His personal knowledge of the breaches of the rules and guidance, combined with repeated failures of proactivity to investigate, to seek authorized assurances and compliance with issues about to deliberate closing of his mind, or at least the reckless behavior. We find it highly unlikely that Mr. Johnson, having been given any reflection to those matters, could himself believe these assertions he made to the House at the time when he was making them, still less that he could continue to believe them to this day. Someone who is repeatedly reckless and continues to deny, which is patent to a person whose conduct is so sufficient to demonstrate intent. Many aspects of Mr. Johnson's defense are not credible. Taken together, they form sufficient basis for a conclusion that he intended to mislead. And that, I think, is the most damning part. That you have the committee itself coming out and saying Boris Johnson, in his defense to us, actively intended to mislead the House. That he intended to mislead the House. And mislead us in his defense. That is damning. That is probably the most damning part. That in his defense, he has gone, I'm gonna try and yeah. I mean, deliberately trying to mislead the committee. That's certainly another thing. I think you can start to see why Johnson not only has those 90-day suspension, but also is losing his ex-member badge as well. We'll see if, of course, that gets followed through on the vote on Monday, of course. But we'll like I say, we'll wait until then. So we conclude that in deliberately misleading the House, Mr. Johnson committed a serious contempt. Recommended sanction. It is ultimately for the House, not the Committee of Privilege, to determine whether the contempt has been committed, and if so, what sanction, if any, to impose. To insist the House in this duty If the House concurs that Johnson committed a serious contempt, we have considered what sanction would be appropriate. In serious cases, the House has the right to suspend a member or withhold their salary or expel them. So again, it is on the House to do this. This is what the SNP member wanted. He wanted to go for full expulsion. It is not on the House. So it's not on the committee to do that. It's on the House. The committee can make the recommendation, but ultimately is for the House to decide that. So those sanctions require the explicit approval of the House on the basis of a motion. So bear in mind, if Rishi Sunak wanted to get rid of Boris Johnson, he could put forward the motion to expel him. But bear in mind, he's stepped down, so doesn't really have to put forward that motion. Then, of course, there's other things that we've talked about that Rishi Sunak could do. He could start him standing again for re-selection as a Conservative MP. He could also permanently boot him out of the Conservative Party as well. Again, two things he's not going to do because, well, as we continuously keep on saying, Rishi Sunak is an incredibly weak leader. So, the House is thus the decision maker in terms of punishment of a member of contempt. Just as its House itself can finally determine whether contempt has actually been committed. The role of committee is therefore to carry out as a delegated power of investigation to report its findings to the House, with recommendations for actions where appropriate. Motions to implement the sanctions recommended by the committee, unlike those recommended by the Committee of Standards on the Independent Expert Panel, are amendable and debatable. So, the standing orders of the House do not set out a list of sanctions which the committee may recommend. In deciding on its recommendations, the committee will be guided by precedent wherever possible and appropriate. There are few relevant procedures. Erskine May makes clear that the House may publish acts or omissions of which there is no precedent, so as long as they fall within the definition of contempt. In addition to sanctions imposed in cases following contempt of the Privilege Committee investigations, sanctions may also be imposed in cases considered by the Standards Committee, where members are also found to have breached the Code of Conduct. In recent years, the Standards Committee has taken steps to try and codify the use of sanctions in such cases. Breaches of the Code of members may also be regarded as contempts, although they are dealt with under separate procedures set up at the House, as they intertwined with history of the Privilege and Standards Committees that indicate there is the considerable overlap between contempts and misconduct. It is therefore legitimate for the Privilege Committee, in considering sanctions, to take account of the Standards Committee practice while making allowances for differences and similarities between standards and privileges. So there's basically, as they say, look, there's two committees that I'll simplify this for you. There's two committees, both have similar but slightly different functions. One committee is, of course, permanently and exists. We're just temporarily, but we're going to go off basically what they said. That is the gist of it, of what was said there. So, based on precedent, by analogy, again, with the Standards Committee practice, the following options are available for the Privilege Committee in cases of contempt by a member. First of all, no further action. Requiring an apology in writing, which would normally be published on the House floor by means of a point of order or a personal statement. Recommending the add motion or reprimand. Recommend withholding of a member's salary or allowances or specified period, even if the member has not been suspended. Recommending suspension from the service of the House for a specified period of time, which during that time the member receives no salary and must withdraw from the proceeds of the House. And finally, recommending expulsion from the House. We note that suspension from the House of 10 days or longer following a report of the committee's privilege engages provision for a recall of MPs Act of 2015, requiring a recall petition to be opened in the member's constituency. There are no precedents for the Committee of Privilege recommending sanctions against a member since this act came into force, and there are no formal criteria for imposing the sanctions in Privilege Committee cases. In 2020, the Standards Committee published a list of aggravated and mitigating factors it would take into account in Code of Conduct cases. We have taken those into account. So, we have concluded that in deliberately misleading the House, Mr. Johnson committed a serious contempt. The contempt was all the more serious because it was committed by the Prime Minister, the most senior member of the government. There is no precedent for a Prime Minister of being found deliberately to mislead the House. If he misled the House on an issue of great importance to the House and to the public, and did so repeatedly. He declined our invitation to reconsider his assertions, and that is what he said to the House was truthful. In his defense to the allegation, he said that he misled. He was an ex post facto jurisdiction and that no more than an artifice. He misled the Commons in his presentation of his evidence. Having taken into account those factors set out above, we consider what sanctions would be appropriate in this case, and we have unanimously concluded. So, people asking, what was the vote? It was unanimous that the maximum sanction we would recommend to the House should be suspension from all services of the House significant to engage the provisions of the Recall Act of MPs. So, having agreed to recommend the sanctions we took into account of this case will set a precedent for the standards and accountability and the honesty that the House expects of ministers. We have no doubt that Parliament and the public will expect the bar to be set high, and therefore to be serious consequences if a minister, in this case, impedes or obstructs the function of the House by deliberately misleading it. Having reached the provisional conclusion as to the recommended sanction, we have therefore followed this procedure and have set out our procedure resolution and have communicated it to the committee proposal of recommendations of a sanction of suspension for a period long enough to engage the provision of a Recall of MPs Act. Inviting his comments, the material was sent out to Mr. Johnson under the conditions of strict confidentiality. This is where it all comes back to next. We then will set out the events that followed and our view of their implications for sanctioning Mr. Johnson in the next section of this report. Number 5, Mr. Johnson's resignation as an MP and his attack upon the committee. So, the procedure adopted by the committee that if the committee intends to criticise Mr. Johnson or any other individual or body will first set out a warning letter. And if the allegation is determined against Mr. Johnson, the letter will state the committee's recommendation as a sanction, if any, and invite his submission on the recommendation. On the 8th of June, we sent by email to Mr. Johnson's solicitors as the chair warning letter, immediately dispatched by single hand hard copy documents containing the extracts of this committee's personal agreed upon draft report for inspection by Mr. Johnson by his nominated legal advisors under secure individuals' conditions. Each page of this document was marked as follows. Privileged in strict confidence for the use of Mr. Johnson and his nominated legal advisors only. It is contempt of the House to reveal these documents, the contents of these documents, and there is no other physical copies of these documents in existence, and the document is only made available in inspection under the invigilation of conditions. It must not be copied, and the Committee of Privileges will consider a final submissions about the content of the document before it publishes its House report. Within 24 hours of receiving this letter, on Friday, the 9th of June, Mr. Johnson announced his intention to resign as MP with immediate effect, and it broke the confidentiality of this process by revealing the contents of the warning letter and links material and attacked the committee. In his public statement, Mr. Johnson impugned the committee and its integrity of its members and the impartiality of its staff and advisors, stating, "We have still not produced a shred of evidence and that I knowingly or recklessly misled the Commons." Again, that's not true because we've just been through some of it. They know perfectly well that when I spoke to the Commons, I was saying what I believed sincerely to be true and what I had been briefed to say, like any other minister. Their purpose from the beginning was not to find me guilty, regardless of the facts. It is very definition of a kangaroo court. The committee is riddled with inaccuracies and reeks of prejudice, but under their observed and rules and justice, I have no formal ability to challenge anything they say. That again, that's false. He absolutely does. Even as they say, the Privilege Committee is there to protect the privileges of Parliament, and that is a very important job. And it should not be using their powers, which have only been very recently designed to amount what is plainly a political hit job on someone they oppose. Oh dear. And it is in no one's interest that the processing committee has launched should the committee for a single day further. I am bewildered and appalled that it can be forced out anti-democratically by a committee chaired and maligned by Harriet Harman with such egregious bias. Oh dear. Mr. Johnson is wrong to describe the committee and its powers as very recently designed. The powers of the committee and the inquisitorial process, it follows, are the same as those enjoyed by the equivalent committees for many years, and has been commonplace, although not invariable. For the oath to be administered to those appearing in the privilege committee in cases, particularly in the case as the one such as the raised the very serious issues, and the committee and its predecessors do not have the power to hear counsel. That would be to adopt a court-like process. In order to ensure that Mr. Johnson and the committee took the additional step of appointing the Right Honourable Sir Ernest Ryder, the former senior president of tribunals and former Lord Justice of Appeal, to advise on the fairness of this process. Sir Ernest has previously carried out a review of the fairness and in natural justice in the House standard system, and the committee has been advised these matters by the House of impartial legal and procedure advisors, the particular Speaker's Counsel, and the Clerk of the Journals, that the committee has had the support of independent clerks team, which has shown unparalleled commitment to the House and our democracy. So we're fine. You can say that, but that's the case. That's the case. He's not. He hasn't got a leg to stand on when he comes back against them on that. So, given the significance of this inquiry, the committee has agreed to exploit the resolution on procedure. In order to ensure fairness of Mr. Johnson, this is stipulated that the oral evidence would be given on oath and written evidence accompanied by a statement of truth, i.e. the Commons would not rely on anything other of evidence other than greater than expressly affirmed to be true. Mr. Johnson would be furnished with this evidence of which the committee intended to rely. Witnesses could then be accompanied by one or more legal advisors, and a warning letter would be sent to report containing criticisms, including an indication on the sanction, and the further submissions could be made. In practice, the committee was still more generous to Mr. Johnson, and Mr. Johnson and his lawyers were provided not just with the evidence on which the committee was proposing to rely, but all material the committee had received, so he had the opportunity to seek his own evidence if desired. So he just decided not to do it. He decided just not to go out and do it. Typical Johnson, really. At Mr. Johnson's request, the committee actively sought evidence accompanied by statements of truth from those of Mr. Johnson, and considered might have the evidence for which would be helpful to him. Mr. Johnson was given time to even make further written submissions. We have taken great care over the publication of the material in this inquiry, and since it contains details about many junior civil servants and others, thorough disclosure to Mr. Johnson, it does not seem necessarily to release public. Mr. Johnson is incorrect of the assertions of the committee's powers are new and its procedures are unfair, and the continuation of the pattern of statements are bold expressions of opinion without justification. At the time we wrote to Mr. Johnson, we had come to no final conclusions, and since we awaited his response in making this statement when he did, Mr. Johnson knew that the committee would be unable to make any substantive response until it completed its inquiry, and its assertions would be unchallenged. We note that Mr. Johnson does not merely criticize the fairness of the committee's procedure, but he also attacks in very strong, indeed vitriolic terms, the integrity, honesty, and honor of its members. He stated the committee had forced him out anti-democratically. This attack on the committee, carrying out its remit from the democratic elected House itself, amounts to attack on our democratic institutions. We consider these statements are completely unacceptable, and in our view, this is contempt. In our view, this conduct, together with egregious breach of confidentiality, is for a serious further contempt. So yeah, completely. So that's another contempt potentially against Johnson. We further note that these latest developments cast new light on some of Mr. Johnson's previous comments about our behaviour. And we draw attention to paragraph 15 above, to the attack mounted on the committee in the media, and by some politicians during the course of the inquiry, couched in terms of personal abuse of the inquiry's committee members. In public, Mr. Johnson himself, aloof from these attacks. When we questioned him about the attacks on the oral evidence session, he told us that he reciprocated our use of the language such as kangaroo courts and witch hunts. In a matter of days after the evidence session on the 30th of March, Mr. Johnson wrote to each individual member of the committee in this letter, in which we printed in Appendix 2 in this report. Johnson stated, at the end of the session, to Charles and Mr. Costa asked me about a series of questions regarding comments that had been made about the committee's work being a witch hunt or a kangaroo court. Having reviewed the transcript, I am concerned at the end of which had been a very long hearing, I was not emphatic enough in the answers that I provided, and I hope that I made clear those answers. I have the utmost respect for the integrity of the committee and all its members and the work it is doing. Clearly, he does not. So, notwithstanding his protestations of respect for the committee and his earlier declaration of the language such as kangaroo court and witch hunts, we note that in his statement on the 9th of June, Mr. Johnson himself used precisely those abusive terms to describe the committee. This leaves us in no doubt that it was insecure, that he was insure in his attempts to distance himself from the campaign of abuse and intimidation of the committee members. And it is our view this constitutes, again, significant contempt. So, and then this gets on into, I think, the lateness of the committee, so they couldn't do it. Yeah, they're then talking about, of course, the committee, and of course, oh no, he would have had perfect time to reply. We would let him. That would have been fine. So, yeah, this is the big one. So, our final conclusion in relation to the sanction. Although Mr. Johnson's resignation as an MP renders it impossible for a sanction of suspension to be imposed, we draw attention to the fact that before events of Friday the 9th of June, we had provisionally agreed to recommend a suspension long enough to engage the provisions of a Recall of MPs Act. And in the light of Mr. Johnson's further contempts, we put on the record that if he had not resigned his seats, we would have further recommended that he be suspended from service of the House for 90 days for repeated contempts for seeking to further undermine the parliamentary process. So here's the thing. Because of Johnson's outburst, they were going to throw the book at him by giving him 90 days. If Johnson didn't have that outburst, they would have still set a sanction, but it would have probably been lesser. So probably, I think, 10 days or more. We don't know. But as they said, it would have triggered a recall election. So, but yeah, so we've prolonged the process by deliberately misleading the House, deliberately misleading the committee, breaching confidence, impugning the committee, and thereby undermining the democratic process of the House, being complicit in the campaign of abuse and attempted intimidation of the committee. In the view of the fact Mr. Johnson is no longer a member, we have also recommended that he should not be granted a former member's pass, which again is pretty a biggie. So finally, conclusion and recommendations. Let's see if we can skip to the end on this. I think that's very much it. Yep, that's it. That's it. That's just a write-up of it, right? Yeah, so that's it, folks. That is the Privilege Committee report. I think that's all the big stuff. I think that's all the big stuff, to be honest. But yeah, like I say, he's gone. They can't really sanction him. Whether he decides to again, well, he can't really protest that because he's already did previously, and he was going to get sanctioned even more. So that is the committee report, and I think, as most people have been saying, it is pretty damning. It's pretty damning. It holds Johnson for contempt not just once, but twice. That's pretty big. Also calling him out and singling him out for the, again, leader of people who were leading this attacks on the inquiry. Again, that's pretty big in itself. This inquiry has been incredible. This inquiry has done its job well, incredibly well. And I think this has really, surprised a lot of people, but not too much. Let's just check if there's any updates on this. Scottish Tory leader Douglas Ross says he backs the Privilege Committee recommendations. Oh, here we go. Rees-Mogg claims Privilege Committee chair Harriet Harman was biased against Johnson. So, in an interview with GB News, an ultra Johnson loyalist, he said the inquiry's report, which he said contained no real sanction, while its recommendation that Johnson be suspended for 90 days was merely trying to make a point. Oh yeah, we're just trying to make a point. Rees-Mogg said the report failed to address Johnson's allegations that most of the members of the committee had already expressed deeply prejudiced remarks about the former Prime Minister's guilt before they had seen the evidence, and they should have recused themselves, he said. Again, that would have delayed the committee by, again, a very significant amount, but Johnson should, if they are biased, then show the comments. What comments are you talking about? Come out and show the comments. So Mogg had this to say: Chris Bryant behaved absolutely properly and recused himself from the committee's investigation because he had perjured it. Harriet Harman did not, and the problem with that is that the chairman of the committee is extremely influential and important. The first draft that goes to committee to vote on is prepared by the chairman of the committee, and the level of power and authority and influence is one that needs to be exercised by someone who is not judged and in the case before the committee. And I think that is a fundamental flaw which undermines all the committee. So again, having a go at Harriet Harman. Bear in mind, there were 4 Tories on the committee. If they had a problem with Harman's chairmanship, they could have voted her out. There are rules pertaining to that. So if you look back over the history of Parliament, and parliamentary sometimes makes great mistakes when it tries to stand on dignity, I think that this report is in danger of making the House of Commons look foolish. Absolutely not. This doesn't make the House of Commons look foolish. It makes it look like it's doing a job. So Nadine Norris coming out and saying any MP who backs the report is fundamentally not a Conservative and at risk of deselection. She says, this report has overreached and revealed its true predetermined inceptions. It is quite bizarre. Harman declared a position before it even began. Jenkins, the most senior MP on the committee, attended an actual party. Any Conservative MP who would vote for this report is fundamentally... hang on, there we go. Any fundamentally not a Conservative and would be held to account by its members and the public in deselections may follow. It's serious. MPs will now have to show this committee what real justice looks like and how it's done. Oh. And then we've got a quote from Harry Cole from a senior Tory source saying, I'm very pissed off with Boris and want him to go away, but this report is a complete joke. The sanctions are so ludicrous and excessive, And Bernard Jenkins aside, I am staggered that any Tory MP would vote for it. I suspect that they will have some serious issues with their ascensions and could be removed and could be remotely surprised if if they were given the boot. Interesting. This is this is going to be interesting. I think Monday's vote is going to be very interesting. I think it's going to be a lot more. Ed Daly just coming out and saying that Boris Johnson is a liar. Well, of course, report I think pretty much proves it. And while these Conservatives fight amongst themselves, again, the country suffers. People are fed up. Rishi Sunak could call a general election, gives people the chance to end this charade. Again, that might be in the offing. That very, very much might be in the offing. We'll see what happens. We will see what happens on this regard. We will see. Monday is going to be interesting. There's probably going to be a lot that comes out in the coming days, but this is going to dominate the news cycle, certainly for the rest of the day, probably tomorrow, certainly over the weekend. And of course, we're going to have the vote on the Monday. Things could get interesting on Monday, depending where that vote goes and which way that vote goes. We'll see. But it will be very telling to see how many people who vote against it, how many allies Johnson has left. Remember, against the Windsor framework, Johnson could really only get 12 MPs on his side. And that was, of course, with the DUP on his side as well. So we'll see. 12 is the number he's got to beat, but we'll see. We'll see. Maggie Pie, how is GB News still allowed to operate? Well, they're not a news channel. They're an entertainment channel. That's how they get away with it. But yeah, it's very, very interesting. Very, very interesting. That's for sure. That is for sure. So, that's the report. It's finally dropped. And has this finally ended Boris Johnson's career? Can we officially really say that, even though we have said that in the past? I think this time, yes, potentially. And until maybe Rishi Sunak, maybe someone else does it, but Boris could always come back. And maybe Richard Trice comes out and says, do you want to come join the Reform Party? Not beyond the realms of possibility if Boris wants to try and get revenge somewhere, because he would be a big vote draw. It would be a very big vote draw for that. And of course, as I still think, I think Boris is going to become a YouTuber. I really do. I think someone will give him his own YouTube channel, or he'll do his own podcast. And he'll just sit there, just hurling grenades over the garden wall. Or be like some ancient old god sitting atop Mount Olympus and just throwing down thunderbolts at the Conservative Party. I think that's Boris Johnson's future. I really do. I really, really do. Yeah. Boris Reform would cause it to implode. Yeah. Is this the end of Berlusconi? Yes. Well, not until the Italians invoke their necromantic powers and bring him back from the dead. And of course, Berlusconi can run again to be prime minister, because after all, Berlusconi had technically died, and there's no rules regarding the fact that undead people can run to be prime minister. So maybe, who knows? We'll see. We will see what happens here in regards to Boris Johnson. Like I say, it's his own future. We've heard rumors he's been in talks with people at CNN, so maybe he will go work at CNN. Who knows? Needless to say, maybe we have seen the last, potentially, and I say potentially, of Boris Johnson's parliamentary career, but he's certainly going to have a career in the media. Maybe as a columnist, as we said, maybe a YouTuber, maybe a podcast. But we haven't seen the last of him permanently. That is for sure. He will not go away. And his entire job, I think, probably for the rest of his life, will be crying about this, saying how this was all unfair. And then, of course, Tucker Carlson's replacement. Maybe, Colin. Maybe you could be right. You could be absolutely right. You could be very, very right on that one. That is true. So yeah, maybe he could end up on Fox News. You could be right on that regard. But yes, as always, like I say, I'm tired. I'm tired after reading all that now. I need a good drink and a lie down, I think, for a while. And by the way, for those of you expecting more chapters on this, I will promise I will get to chapter 3. I promise. I haven't started chapter 3, but to be honest, with everything that's been going on with Johnson at the moment, I'm just Johnsoned out completely. So I just haven't had the will to pick it up and finish off the sort of the rest of the book or chapter 3. Like I say, I've skimmed through it, shall we say, and read parts of it. But like I say, I want to do a proper book club and really dissect all the individual chapters. So chapter 3 is coming eventually, but forgive me for the time being. I'm really honestly Johnsoned out. So it is coming, but not at the moment, just because we've just had so much Johnson at the moment. And like I say, it's literally on my desk here, so I'm constantly reminded about it. So don't worry about it. It's coming eventually, but not yet. I am completely Borised out at the moment. So, as always, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been absolutely fantastic for you to come along and join me today. Like I say, there's been a lot of you today. It's been absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much again for Graham for coming along and joining me today. If you haven't checked out Labour Social, then absolutely go check out Labour Social. I will amend stuff after the stream has been live. I'll put a link down below to him in the YouTube comments so you can go and see him. But of course, as always, thank you very much for joining me today. And of course, as always, go enjoy yourselves. I think we all deserve a big drink today. And like I say, I am glad I am having friends over at the weekend, because I certainly need a drink on this after the weekend. So, as always, we'll see you very soon. And of course, we'll see you then. I generally didn't know how to end this. I'm just like at the moment. So, as always, we'll see you all very soon.